Welcome to the 62nd episode of the Patio Pondering Podcast. Today we're doing something just a little bit differently in that I'm interviewing a guest that I don't know. All the other guests I've had in the past, I've had some sort of connection with them, whether it's 4-H or family or an industry connection. Today I have with us Jay Setchell, who lives in Texas, but I learned that he has a farm near Mendota, Illinois, which is close to where my ancestors settled. Welcome to the podcast today, Jay.
I'm glad to be here, sir.
So, Jay, before we jump in, I read your bio, and similar to you reading my bio on Podmatch, there was something that really stood out with you, and that's your mention that you grew up on a farm and subsequent work with being in the military, in the Marine Corps, being an entrepreneur that really stood out with me. And I chose not to research you outside of the biography on Podmatch, because I wanted to get your raw response to what my listeners like to listen to. You mentioned growing up on the farm. We know it's in Mendota. Can you talk to us about how some of those lessons from growing up on the farm helped you in life?
Sure. I number one, I'm eighth generation on our farm, and I'll be 76 New Year's Eve. So I go back, and I was born in 49, and so when you talk about the 50s and the 60s. If you had a 60 horsepower tractor, it was pretty big. If you had an 80 horsepower, it was bigger. If you had 100 horsepower by the end of the 60s, you were really doing well. So, but I had a lot of responsibility. I started feeding calves and all that by the time I was 5. And, mixing up the powdered milk with the warm water and taking it out with a nipple pail and feeding calves and stuff. And I used to buy them from my cousin Warren, who had milk cattle. And we were feeding anywhere, it would depend on the time, 120 to 150 to 600 head. And that would be, we usually fed 2 sets. And so it just make a long story short, I guess, is the responsibility of, being with my dad. I always was outside. I was always on the tractor. I was always doing something. I learned, it's like walking beans, if you've heard of that. It's like walking beans and chopping the corn out, and chopping the thistles. And so I remember doing that from about the age of 7 on. And, or climbing silo to help fill it with, we had 4 silos. And we had a pretty big operation for what what it was. And, but like in the wintertime, like right now, or especially in January, February, early March, when you climb up and we had clay silo unloaders that had little chippers on the end, and it would chew most of the frozen silage off where the concrete was on the staves, but not all of it. So you always had to leave a pick and a shovel up there and go up and pick it down. And the week after I turned 17 in 1967, I was up in the silo, chipping silage off, speaking of that real quick, and I came down and I had to step onto the auger, the feeding auger that ran to the west, and I took about 4 steps to just about that time start to jump off into a snowbank because I had just come down from chipping the silage, and my grandfather hit the auger on and then hit it off. Well, my right foot slipped, it went down, broke my ankle, sliced my boot open and all that. And had he not turned it off, he would have turned me into sausage instantly. I was about 3 feet from the stanchion that separates where the augers run through. So I was very fortunate, but I was able to catapult off into the snowbank, and my boot was sliced open, and the blood was cut running, and the ankle was broken, but I was just very fortunate. But I guess and I've had 2 of my cousins die from. One was a PTO shaft, and the other one was up on the top of a grain bin, got caught in the drive shaft running the auger. And so, farming's a dangerous hobby. I mean, it's like not a hobby, job. And it's kind of like, I don't remember many dogs in our area that didn't have 3 legs because they were always chasing the plow or running with a disc or doing something, and they'd get caught. But they, hey, with 3 legs, they went just as fast as they ever did with 4.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. But I was fortunate enough that my dad and my grandfather and all of the relatives before me had farmed that farm. And so it was, we also did a lot of agricultural spraying. So we had a business, my dad had a business doing that, and we sprayed and seeded and dusted not only for other farmers and ourselves, of course, but we had contracts with Del Monte. And Del Monte had a plant 2.5 miles northwest of us, and then up at Rochelle, Illinois, right north on 51, you're familiar with that too, they had another one. So we sprayed tens of thousands of acres every year for green beans, lima beans, sweet peas, sweet corn, asparagus, on top of everything else. But my dad was very inventive with things, and that's where I learned a lot with. It's like we would spray or seed rye in standing corn late in the fall. So when we harvested corn, it was like we were driving on a lawn of green about a foot high. But what that did was, because he could do it very quickly, and rye was very inexpensive, but it put a lot of nitrogen back into the soil. So, when you harvested and then you disked it down or you plowed it up, it was interesting. But I just learned that, number one, I know that the cattle didn't get, if the livestock didn't get fed, we didn't eat. That was just the way it was. And I learned responsibility that nothing came for free. And whenever I would borrow a tractor or to disk or my land, the land that he granted me, didn't grant me, he charged me for it, but that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. And it's like in high school, I worked at you probably heard of Hume. Well, they used to make grain dryers and pickup wheels. All your combines on the beans and oats, and they're all those little fingers that come down are made by Hume, which became Hart Carter Corporation in about 1965 or 66. So when I was in high school, end of my sophomore year, junior and senior, I worked at Hart Carter. High school got out of quarter to 4, and I went to 5 blocks down the road to the east, and I worked from 4 o'clock until 12:30 every night. Then I get back up at 5:30 in the morning and help my dad with the chores. And the reason I helped my dad with the chores was because if I didn't help him with his chores, he wouldn't help do my chores and my cattle and hogs in the evening, and he would charge me for it. And so it was a responsibility. If I didn't have the money, I couldn't buy the gas. So, I was pretty fortunate with that. Like, most of my fuel I got off the farm because I got I had 4 55-gallon barrels that he had underneath his big barrels, his 500 and 1,000-gallon barrels, and we just fill it up with gas, and I, of course, had no road tax on. I think it was like 16 cents a gallon when I was a sophomore, a junior and a senior, 16, 17, with no road tax. In town, it was 22 or 24 cents a gallon. But for, regular premium I usually ran. But it was just, I think growing up, I learned life and death. I learned that, foundering. I learned that we would sometimes get feeder cattle in that had been bred, and we didn't know it when we bought them, because my dad would take one of our planes and fly out, and what we got for the winter section of the cattle, that 6 months, we would buy from the Dakotas because they had a heavier coat of fur on them. And then for the summer, spring, summer, early fall section, we get out of Nebraska or Oklahoma, because by feeder cattle, they'd ship them in by rail to Western Cattle Company. Then we'd truck them out to the farm. So, and then with chickens, we had. So I grew up shoveling chicken crap out the windows of the brooder house, with pig crap. We had hogs. I know that I learned very young. I was about 6 or 7, and my dad says, "Hey, let's take this little pig." It was like 2 weeks old. We'll take it out here and play with him for a little bit. Well, Dad reached in, and that little piglet was squealing, and that old hog, she knocked down the farrowing fence, the crate. She came after us. My dad dropped that piglet, and we headed for the door. I thought I was going to die. They wouldn't stop. But I just overall, It's like my grandmother was Pennsylvania Dutch. My dad's mother, she lived across. My dad built them a house across the field from us. So I heard all that stuff like red sun at night, sailor's delight. Red sun in the morning, sailors take warning. You learn the simple basics of responsibility, preventive maintenance on your tractors or your trucks, and check the oil, check this, check that before you start stuff. You never, on the equipment, you were stopping every 3 hours and greasing the zerks, or you come in at nighttime. If you came in at 11 at night from plowing, you still cleaned the moldboards off. You made sure they were spotless, and we'd brush them down with old used motor oil from when we changed them. So they were good to go. And at the end of the harvesting season, everything got cleaned off, washed down, dried up. And my dad had a big nozzle on a spray can, and he would spray everything with oil. And so we had tractors and combines that they look new after 5 years or 10 years. I mean, you couldn't tell the difference because in the summer, we'd wash them and we'd wax them, and you took care of stuff. But a lot of that detail came from airplanes, because you're very familiar. You don't get in an airplane unless you've checked everything, because once you get up, whether you're at 600 feet or 1,600 feet or whatever, you got to know you're safe. But the interesting thing was learning about feeding the cattle and the commercial feed that we had. My dad made a little thing as well too, Jim, that we would meter in the commercial feed, and or they had another product that was more of a fine product. It was minerals. And we would meter that in with the silage as it went on by. And to the west, we had 100. The auger was 180 feet long to the west, and then to the north was 150 feet. So we had two different sets of lots for cattle. So that went in between the silos, and one ran over the top of the other, and it would drop the silage in here and move it out to that way. And but I just learned a lot of detail. You know how many hours you can plow on a tank of gas. You learn how many acres you can disc in an hour. So if you pull into an 80-acre field and you're running 12 acres an hour, hey, in 7 hours I'll be done and headland's finished. I'll be back. But I better have somebody bring me some fuel, because
exactly
we didn't have the big tanks. I mean, some of that, we were running pretty small tractors back. I mean, in comparison, a lot of people had 3 and 4 bottom plows, and then we got to the 5, and then finally got to a 6. But I just learned about weather. I learned about life. I learned about, when to see the cattle start to turn and back up with their tails to the northwest. Probably within the next day or two, you're going to have a storm blow in. And it was a great learning experience. I mean, I wouldn't have traded it for anything in the world, whether that was sorting eggs between brown and white and double yolkers, or my dad loading up the 30 dozen egg cases, my dad taking them to the candling plant in the evening, and dropping them off. And, it was just it's something that very few people experience anymore. And I do like to look at the shorts on YouTube on occasion. They'll show some kid that's 7 years old, and he's up in a 500 horsepower combine with a 12-row header, and he's on GPS, and he's driving the damn thing. It's like, or he's running a 650 horsepower 4-wheel drive with tracks, not 4-wheel drive, tracks, pulling a 1,500 or 1,500 grain bin, unloading. We could take 10 wagons. We couldn't have filled up that much, But time and technology, which kind of brings me back to one thing I would like to say. When I wrote my book here recently, I acknowledge the fact of how farms have disappeared and how small towns have disappeared because of the farms going away. And I've got the details in the book, but it's literally millions of people don't work on the farms that used to do it. And all my friends, I mean, a decent sized farm in the 50s and even the 60s was 300 acres or 320 acres. That's a
half section.
A half section. And, and we had a half section that we owned, but then we leased or rented from two old ladies. For 40 years, they had about another 1,200 acres, I believe it was. And because we did about 1,800 acres for quite a while. And, but, and you made up things. You learned things. The big thing was a 2-row rotary hoe. And my dad thought, oh, well, heck, I could buy a 2-row rotary hoe real cheap. The biggest they made was a 4-row. So what we did, he took a 2-row and he put a big angle iron across the back, and then he put cabling out from the drawbar out to the ends to support it, to hold on to it. Then he put another 2-row out to the left and a 2-row out to the right. So we had a 6-row, and we had an 88 Oliver that we dropped a 99 industrial Oliver engine in, which we were running about 85, 88 horsepower. That was a lot in the early 60s. That was unheard of. And so we could pull in road gear that rotary hoe, and we could rotary hoe an acre a minute. So that was amazing, where other people were still pulling a 2-row or maybe a 4-row with a 60 horsepower tractor, and they were running at 9 miles an hour and we're running at 14. So you learned a lot. I don't know. It's just it's the interesting things that there's so many details. It's crazy, but it's whether it's hogs, and some people say, well, what did you feed your hogs? Well, a lot of the hogs they just live with the cattle, and they cattle crap because that's where they got their corn, the corn they went through, and they got their stuff. And you wonder, well, they had other stuff, but I don't know. That was just some of what I learned. And then airplane flying, I always flew with my dad. He would say, hey, come on, let's go. It's going to be a little bit till supper, when I was younger. And we go over and get in the plane and we go fly for an hour. And so I soloed when I was 14 on a side strip in a 1947 Taylorcraft. And as a matter of fact, I've got the propeller sitting right over there in the corner off of that airplane. My dad put a metal prop on it in 1958 and took that wood prop off. So, it's just a bit of history. It's a bit of... and it's a good way to live. It was clean. And what I really enjoyed, and I learned from my parents, was helping other people. Because we had pretty good sized equipment. So if we had big snowstorms, we had some of the bigger equipment around, and we would help our neighbors dig out. But you got to, just like your neighbors are generally a mile away. And the next one's a mile and a half away. Where the kids in town, it was only 50 feet to the next house. So you went down the road or pulling the school buses out or digging out the ways, digging the snowdrifts out. But I don't know. It was just, and if somebody got injured, you took them a pot of soup, a pot of stew. You helped bring their crops in. And I know when my dad passed away, I a very strong memory. And a lady came through and was telling my mom, she said, Mrs. Setchell, she says, you don't know me, but we lived, my husband, your husband, Mr. Setchell knew my husband, and we lived about 8 miles east of you and about 4 miles south. Well, that's quite a ways back in the old days, And, but when my husband lost his leg in a corn picker accident, your husband put together a couple of his cousins and a couple of other friends and stuff, and they came and they took our whole crop in and made everything was cribbed. Everything was done within 3 days. Done. And what got me at that time, Jim, was I cried. I mean, I was crying anyhow, but it pretty well cried me out. But she said, your husband stopped early in January or very, very late in December of that year that happened, and around 57 or 58, and he gave us $300 in cash to help buy fuel oil for our fuel, for the furnace, and to help for food. And $300 in 1950, say 57, compared to today, what's that? 20,000? I don't know. I mean, it'd be a substantial sum, but she said that got us through the winter. Because he didn't have other stuff. So, that's what I've always wondered. How have I paid back, and have I helped enough people in my life to pay forward what my dad and my mom did?
That's a philosophical thought that I think a lot of us have. And I think a lot of that goes back to a little bit of our upbringing and you brought it up and I wrote down, there's a sense of service, a sense of hospitality that we get in a rural community.
Yes, sir.
Associated with farm.
Yes, sir.
And as you're speaking, you're crossing a generation and you're talking about the way things used to be. The good old days is people that I interact with that are off the farm, and my aunts and uncles talk about the good old days. But I think there's something that we're missing when we talk about the good old days, and you brought it up, and that's that sense of community, that sense of service, the sense I'm responsible, a dotted line responsible for my neighbors.
Well, you are, and with that, they were responsible for you, and it was a two-way street. If I was down the road at Joe Schmidt's house, and I did something bad, his dad wouldn't have a problem spanking my butt, and my dad would spank my butt again when I got home.
Yeah.
I mean, it was fair game. It was like, these people are responsible for you. And I remember a gentleman, I was riding my bike one time. I was probably 4 or 5 miles from home. And I was about 8 years old, maybe 9. And this gentleman pulls up and he says, let me go ahead and I'll help take you home. And I go, I don't know you, and he says, oh, and he told me his name, and I said, oh, your son's Norbert. And I knew his son, but I never met the father. I mean, I'd seen him on the tractors or I'd seen him out in the field, but I'd not interacted with him from 5 feet apart, And so he put my bike in the back of his pickup truck, and I got in the back of the truck and we drove on home and lets us out, and Dad's going, hey, Norm, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. It's like, wow. And he says, your son's, he's smart. He's like, he questioned who I was. But he says, he didn't know. He said, he'll know when you're farming, because he used to hook 2 Minneapolis tractors together, put the tricycle gear ones on the back of the other one, so he would pull with 2 tractors, and he ran a straight stacks off of both of them, and we could hear him for 3-4 miles away. It's like my dad would go, I don't know how he's not going to be able to hear by the time he's 50. But that you hit a good. You took care of, whether it was at the church, and you had your everybody that showed up at church. Hey, how's it going? Or my dad had a real big thing with going to town, not every day, but almost every day, for coffee. And we had lots of little cafes around Mendota, because Mendota was like 4,000 people then, but we had a bunch of little truck stops that didn't really have any trucks. It was almost always farmers. But, you'd sit down and say, well, Jim, how the beans looking, And one thing that my dad did was he took a lot of different farmers up, and they would look over their fields from, say, 1,200, 1,500 feet in the air, and you could see wet spots, weak spots, spots that were a little bit greener. Okay, we need to drop some anhydrous in there, and give it a shot of nitrogen. And so you learned a lot that I haven't thought about now that I'm talking about it. Yeah. That you just worked and helped everybody. Nobody was even if you didn't understand what the other person did sometimes, or you didn't agree with it, you didn't have this disconnect that we have today in today's world, and you learned fixing your own stuff. You had to be your own electrician, your own plumber, your own carpenter. You had to learn this, to know that. I mean, I remember pulling, the head off of, like the old Oliver 70 or the 77. And now we would take that down to LaSalle or Peru, which I know you know where that's at too.
Yeah.
And you would get the head milled, or maybe the valves ground, but you took the engine apart and you put it back together. So I was doing that before I ever knew what was going on, and I remember we got a new manure spreader. I was about 12, I think, 10, 11, 12, so about 60, 61, something like that. And it was a flail, the flail type new idea. And it came in boxes. A truck dropped it off, so we put it together.
Really?
Because you saved money. You didn't have to go buy it, put together at the implement dealer. You bought it through the implement dealer, but you put it together. So you learned all that stuff. Welding. Yeah. I was learning how to weld when I was 6, 7 years old, and got the old Lincoln arc welder out, and
the big old tombstone that weighed 500 pounds.
It was, acetylene and oxygen. We learned that too, and laying dimes and rolling. And it was just, it was a different time. It really seemed like a different time because there wasn't anybody you ever came down the road to meet that you didn't say, "Hey, how you doing?" Or wave to them. You always did, or when they drove by the front of your house on the gravel road with the dust rolling up, with the wind blowing the dust, they beep, 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 It was just it was a time of help and gratitude and giving and respect. It's words that we don't use anymore. It's really words that we don't use anymore. That was the different time. That was a...
I think back to 20, 25 years ago when my wife and I first got married, and we bought a small farm outside of Perry, Iowa, which is northwest of Des Moines. And after being there for a while and knowing the neighbors, we talked about things. And I remember riding with Mary Farley, rest her soul, in an old square body Chevy truck that she and Harold owned, driving down the road. And I called it the Euston trip. And we're going down the road, and she goes, "Well, there used to be a farm there, and there used to be a farm there, and there used to be a farm there, and used to be a farm there."
Yeah.
So when you're talking about a mile away, there used to be somebody on every mile.
Oh, yeah.
And this is 2005-ish.
See, they were already gone. Right.
They're gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only gone as in the families, but the farmstead, the trees, the barn, gone.
Well,
totally changed.
Yes. And something that now we did when I was young, we made sure we had no fences. The fences were all gone. And the reason was it's like if you went east on our gravel road off the blacktop that they put in like 55 or 56, it was an old gravel road, and they finally blacktopped it, maybe 58. But at any rate, the fence on the right was up above the level of the ground. The base of the fence was, say, 4 feet out of the ground to your right. The problem was in the winter when the stalks would blow after your corn, they caught on the fence. Well, then when the snow blew, now the snow is 10 feet deep across the road.
Yeah.
And
a natural snow fence.
It was like a snow fence, exactly. And so we made sure all the fences were gone, but we planted multiflora rose, if you've ever heard of that.
Oh, God.
Oh, and it gets out of control. But what we did is we used that as field separators, and that would hold the snow, which was good because it held the rabbits, it held the quail, animals that could escape from the fox and the raccoons that wouldn't go in and get it, kind of like Brer Rabbit, like the old story. So, but the sad thing is that when the newer generation of people 25 years ago, even 30, 35 years ago, when they bought a farm or took over a farm, they knocked down everything. And they plowed all the way into the ditch.
Yeah.
They didn't give you, there was no respect for nature. There was no respect. And I know some of those people. And some did, but a lot didn't. But oh my gosh, I mean, yeah, if you were flying up, if you and I took the plane today, like in, say, 65, you could fly, and I mean, there were a few farm homes where people lived, but they didn't farm. They just lived in the country. It was just like an older couple or something. And but in general, they farmed like 80 acres, and they milked 25 head of cattle, and they worked nights at Hart Carter for extra money in the winter because they didn't have that much for the crops, you know. And it was a big cycle. It's like we never baled hay, but I baled a lot of hay with helping other people, you know. And one guy it's kind of a funny story. The old gentleman, he'd been hit by lightning twice, and that doesn't happen often. And he used to wear heavy clothes all the time, summer and winter. And I said to Charlie Wolf was his name. He was one of our neighbors. And I said, Charlie, and we were baling hay, and it must have been 100 degrees out, and it was hot. And you know, I'm like 8 trying to pull a bale of hay up, and you're learning how to swing that. And I said, Charlie, how come you're wearing so many clothes today? And he says, well, it keeps the cool in and the heat out. And so in the wintertime, the snow's deep, you know, and you're driving by and you're helping him with clean his yard out because he didn't have much for equipment. And Charlie, how come you're wearing so many clothes? And he said, well, it keeps the cold out and keeps the heat in. So it's like, okay, yeah, you know, so you got some really words of wisdom for some, you know, just it's funny. I haven't thought of that in probably 60, 65 years. You know, it's been decades since I've thought of that. So, but you know, whether people had apple trees or elderberries, maybe if you have elderberry bushes, you'd go down and you pick up all the wild elderberries and you make elderberry jelly. You know, or asparagus back in the day. And, you know, drive down the road and get out and that's where you got your asparagus. And my dad one time over in one of the corner of our cattle lots said, you know what, I don't know why we're doing this. For years we've been driving down the road. My grandma used to do it. And the kids, we get out and take a knife and we not, you know how to do it. So he just took one section, it was like 8 by 8, and just sprinkled some asparagus seeds in there, and we had our own asparagus patch forever. They probably still got it. I don't, you know. My brother's on the farm, but we've leased the farm out now for, oh gosh, probably 20 years. So we haven't physically farmed. My brother wasn't a farmer, but that's what I was going to do. I was going to take over the farm. I would have run the farm. I had about 1,600 hours of flight time. I never had any ground school to get a license, but I always thought that I would be an ag pilot, a spray pilot, and I would farm and I'd raise cattle. And when I died in the Marine Corps in November of '69, I spent a year in the Naval Hospital, and that just changed my life. I mean, it changed me forever as far as physical stuff. And I came home that over a year later, and the silos were gone. My dad said, no, he was a good visionary of seeing that these big lots were going to open up in Nebraska and have 25,000 head of cattle. And the people that fed 800 to 1,000 or 1,200 head a year it just wasn't going to do it, you know? Mm-hmm. And of course, mentioning that, it's kind of like putting corn in the silo. Sometimes corn prices were high enough and beef prices were low enough that you were better off to harvest the corn and not feed cattle. But if you had the area to feed cattle, you had to think about it. Was always a constant thing, because my dad was like you probably learned from some of the people that used to be farms. It's like, well, some years are good and some years aren't good. I mean, I remember him having to borrow money to pay the land tax, because some years the crops were just bad and prices for cattle were down. But you have to do that, and you can't quit. I think that's where I probably learned some of my it's always too soon to quit. It's always too soon to quit. You've got to keep trying. Never quit.
I wrote about that this morning in my blog. It had to do with genealogy and brick walls, but it's also applicable to the farm. My mom called it stick-to-itiveness. I call it persistence, where you have a challenge and you just attack it.
Mm-hmm. You can't quit. Well, I learned it from, I guess, from back in the 50s and the 60s, because it didn't matter. It's like if I was out, if you've never shoveled chicken crap, it's very ammonia-y, and you got these windows that fold out from the chicken house, and you take the windows out, and you get on the tractor and you pull the spreader up and you shovel chicken shit. That's just what you do, and you're 8 years old, or 9 or 10 and 11 and 12, and it's a hot summer day, you're getting dizzy from the ammonia, but you're still shoveling, but you still got another 100 feet to do on a place that's 20 feet wide, and it's one scoop at a time. One scoop at a time. So it's kind of like if you're going to do push-ups, you can only do one push-up at a time. So how do you keep doing it? Keep pushing forward. Never quit. Don't stop. Just you hit a certain pain level, if you will, and it doesn't matter. Work through it. And so I think that all of that I went through, I learned, I saw, I experienced, is what helped me. Well, the Marine Corps pounded it into me, just made it more firm, made it more solid, and reinforced it, because it's the same thing in the Marine Corps. You watch out for the guy in front of you, behind you, and to your left and to your right. You're not fighting for your girlfriend and apple pie and mom and dad back home. You're fighting to stay alive and keep these people alive, because they're fighting to keep you alive. That's what that's what you need to learn. But it's kind of like the same farm effect, because you're helping your neighbors. If they're sick, you take them a big pot of stew, and you help them out. It's something that what we're talking about is something that I've not thought about in several years, and it's something that our country's really lost a lot. I read a guy the other day. He farmed 44,000 acres in 3 states. 932 different fields, and he was getting busted he has to spend 2 years in jail because the government.
Oh, we know who you're talking about.
Well, the government was saying he was lying, but what he did, he started. I read the article, and I read from some neighbors. I don't know. He's out west or northwest. I don't know, but it was the fact that they started planting a field, but it was too wet to finish, so they waited 3 weeks or something to go back and finish it. But and all, I don't know. I don't remember the article that well, but it was like, wait a minute. But when you get that big, I in my book that I wrote, The Strength Within You, is. And it's about ready to come out. The Strength Within You, and then the subtitle is It's Always Too Soon to Quit. And I put in there about farming, and I put in there a breakdown of where the farms were at in the 40s and 50s, where they were at in the 60s and 70s, and where they're at today. And the number of people working on farms is down by 2.5 million. The number of farms is down by over 1 million. That number of acreage, we're producing more now on 1 million acres by far, by a long way, than we used to do on 3 million acres, let's just say. But it's got to come to us. It's going to come to a head at some point.
But I think you're talking about what we could consider a success story from your generation and partially the generation before you, where they got tired of shoveling chicken manure 1 scoop at a time. And you talked about your dad, they got tired of doing 2 rows at a time. How can I do 6? So then that 6 turned into 12 and turned into 16 and turned into 24 and turned into 36. Your generation has taught us that we can do things better, maybe more efficient, but that's also a two-edged sword.
It's definitely a two-edged.
We get so good that we don't need everybody that wanted to do good.
Well, it's a two-edged sword on the fact that we've put so many farms out of business that they don't have a livelihood, that they had to learn something completely different, which is not bad, but yet at the same time, what's hurt is that little, you go to my hometown that was 4,200 then, let's say when I was say 65, just for the sake of discussion, and now it's 6,000. Okay, we used to have 6 or 7 or 8 cafes to go to for pie and coffee or just meet with the farmers or whatever. Now there's 2. And the downtown is gone. There is no downtown.
Oh.
And that's that kills me, because it's like elevators are gone, big elevator systems are put up, and they've just taken over everything. Well, I understand it, and it's growth and it's productivity, but at the same time, it's life. It's people's lives. It's a way of life that we raised a lot of good people with an excellent work ethic and understanding. And it's like, I was going to mention, it's like, I remember being young and pulling weeds. If you had a cattle pasture, cattle don't eat milkweed. They don't eat smartweed. They don't like thistles. So, my dad would, he'd always be on me. He's like, hey, you need to get out there and, around the cattle lot fence, pull the weeds, right? But my dad told me, he says, whenever I say, hey, it looks like the thistles in the north pasture need to be taken care of. And, there's a difference between Canadian thistles and bull thistles. Bull thistles are great big and Canadian thistles are smaller. Okay. And see, my memory's not that bad. I can remember back. But he would say, I never want to have to tell you to do anything. You should be able to understand it when I just say, it appears that needs to be taken care of. And he told me, and I remember him telling me, I was about 8 or 9. A lot happened in that time frame, because I was already staying out of school, driving tractors and, filling cribs and silos, and in the spring helping put in the fall taking out. And it was, I learned to do weed pulling after it had rained. Wait a couple days, a good rain. Man, they just pop out,
Exactly.
If you're doing it by hand. So, but you learned a lot, and it's something to pass on. But the people today don't really care, and I've called it for years the microwave society. They want to do it now. They want to do it now, or they'd rather be on their iPad than out mixing milk and feeding a calf and learning life out of a nipple bucket, and how that calf would ram that nipple bucket and smack it into the fence.
Yeah. Why is he doing that?
Well, they think how their mothers felt, It's like,
oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah. So
you brought it up a little bit. I wonder how the resilience that you learned on the farm and the life and death lessons you learned on the farm helped you in 1970 when you were laying in that bed in a naval hospital.
Oh, tremendously. I mean, I think it was innate in me. It became part of you. It's like seeing, we didn't have many cattle that ever died, maybe 4 or 5 out of all of the time and all that we ever raised. But you learn that there's life and there's death, and in the never quitting, like I say, you get back on a 3-bottom plow and you're on the middle of 200 acres. It takes a long time when you're going 3 miles an hour. It's like,
oh yeah, am I ever going to get there doing 36 inches at a time?
Get to the other end of the field, and I turn around and think, I did all that time and I didn't turn much soil over. But the thing is, it got done. How did they feel when they were behind an ox or a horse with a 1-bottom plow? So it's like we were way ahead of that. But I that, and then starting the businesses I did after I kind of rehabbed for about 6 months after I got out of the hospital in 70, and late 69. Well, yeah, no, 70, late 70. And because I died 69, I spent all 11 and a half months in the Naval Hospital, and then I didn't do much till that next spring, and late spring. But I just look back at all the stuff that I went through, and then the businesses that I started, and I started 3 businesses that did pretty good. And then I got hit by a drunk driver almost head on. He got killed. He got thrown out of his pickup truck, no seatbelt, run over by his own truck. And I had my seatbelt on, had a brand new Monte Carlo. It was 300 miles, and I rolled several times, and I bled out. And that was back, way out in the middle of nowhere, and people found me in the ditch, and I'd bled out. And they got me back. I don't remember after I passed out and started up into the heavens, but it was just never quitting, always looking for the positives, looking for, if I keep working at it, something's good is going to happen. If I don't get to something good, then I've got to have the common sense to understand, what do I need to change to make it better, or what do I need to change to go a different direction? And a lot of times it doesn't take much. It's like when you cut an angle on a field, disc and stalks, do you cut a slight angle if it's soft ground, or do you cut, if it's harder ground, cut a stronger angle? And it's just, and I haven't thought about that since I was learned it at 9 or 10 years old, and I'll be 76, so that's a long time. But that, I think, got me through a lot of my tough times. And then I died my 3rd time when I was 31 and a half. I jumped in a swimming pool on the 4th of July, 1981, and landed on my feet and had a compression fracture and broke C3, 4, 5, and 6 in my neck, and then drowned and was paralyzed and was told I'd never move from the shoulders down, and definitely never walk. And at best, I would potentially move my arms a little bit. And my left arm, I got back. My hand works pretty good. My wrist is fused. So on and so forth. My right arm doesn't work. My hand I've got nothing. I've got my shoulder, but that's it. My right leg's always been dead. My left leg was back some, but that, between the Marine Corps and then the next accident, and that accident in 81, and then all the stuff since then, I had my 73rd surgery. It was my 15th back surgery about five months ago. So I've had a lot of surgeries.
You truly are a testament to resilience.
Yeah. Yeah, I speak of that in my book, and which is kind of what I wrote the book for, was to like I say, the name of the book is, The Strength Within You, It's Always Too Soon to Quit. And I didn't write the book. Yes, I talk about some of my deaths in there. 4 years ago, I had COVID Delta, and I spent 5 months in 4 hospitals. And they told my wife to go home and make funeral arrangements. I wasn't going to make it because I was 71. I wasn't obese at all. I didn't have what's that blood? I wasn't diabetic or anything like that, which was a big problem for people with COVID. And we adopted twins, a little boy and a little girl. We had them since they were 3 weeks old. We adopted them at 3 years, and they're over 8 now. So we still got twins, and I'm pretty old.
Yeah.
And But they had brought it home from preschool. And my wife had it. But didn't know it for another week. And then that was when ivermectin was still out. And she started ivermectin on a Monday, and Friday she was over it. It was done. Then the next week she came out and she says, Jay, let's take you tomorrow and get you tested just to see, because you slept a little bit longer yesterday, which was a Saturday. And I said, yeah, but I hurt a lot. I've got a lot of pain, and and I don't get around well. I'm in a wheelchair here, and that's why I move once in a while just to kind of reposition myself because it hurts.
Yeah.
But anyhow, we went in, and the doctor said, you need to go to emergency right now. That's what he told her after he said I was positive. And I told Sherry, my wife, I don't need to go to emergency. I'm okay. I don't feel bad. And she said, and she turned and she had tears run down her cheeks. He said he doesn't know if you're going to live long enough to get to emergency. I was 20 points below on my blood oxygen, below a major heart attack. So they met us at the door with oxygen, and I got all through that. But it was my attitude that carries it through. It's your perseverance. It's all that. But that's why I say, when I wrote the book, I'd been told to write a book for 50 years. And because people couldn't believe what happened 56 years ago, and what I'd been through. And I died twice in 4 years, and, both in car accidents, one hitting a semi and the other a drunk driver. And like I say, I talk about some of the medical stuff, some of the issues, some of the odd things that happen after surgeries, and that are really bad. And but it's not to amplify that whatsoever. What it is the strength within yourself. What do you find, and how do you find, and where did that come from? Did it come from to get through all that? Did it come from your upbringing? Did it come from going to Sunday school a lot? Did it come from your faith? Did it come from your grandparents? Is it part of your DNA? Is it part of just something you learned that's innate in you that you can't explain? Is it anger? Is it frustration? Is it pain? Is it how do you get that? And by digging within yourself to find these issues to help you get through problems and situations, I try to let people know that your resilience, your perseverance, your courage, your grit, that's an old word that people don't use much anymore. And my grandma told me once when I did something, I got hurt pretty bad, and she told me I needed to lay down and rest and do this and do that, and I'd been bleeding and blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, Grandma, I got to go back out. And she says, okay, all right. She said, you got more grit than people today just don't understand. And I was like 8 or 7. I don't remember. Yeah. I was young. And but to find that grit, the perseverance, the determination, how can you apply that, and where does that come from to help you get through all the adversities, setbacks, detours, roadblocks, failures, and things in your life? And when and I don't understand. Jay doesn't understand when some people, they've lost their job. I understand it's a tough thing. It's not good, or they have to move from Des Moines to Charleston, South Carolina, or wherever. Oh, it's terrible. It's life upsetting. It's a whole thing. I have started different businesses and moved over 40 times. 40 times. 40 times. Wow. That's a lot. But it's not that you can't do it. You just have to accept it and look forward to what are you going to do to make this work, and how can you and you know what, in making it work is, in my mind, I think what's helped me do this is it's always been about other people. How can I come up with a product or a service that will help somebody? And by doing that, it kind of It's like being back on the farm, I guess, as a kid. You're providing a product or a service that can help people better their lives. And I think the more people you help, the better person you become. I've always believed that, and hopefully they will pay it forward. And unlike your education, I'm a high school graduate. I mean, I didn't do very well in high school either. My mom and dad were upset because my mom was a teacher and my dad was always on the school board and president of the school board half the time, and I was the black sheep. I was the oldest one, but all my brothers and sisters, they were all straight A's, and here I'm like, oh man, I was bored. I had so much other stuff to do in my life. I wanted to get out and go. I wanted to get out and do, because my brothers and sisters, I have one sister, she's a lot like me, but she still didn't get out into the farming part of it whatsoever, or really the livestock, but she loves animals, and a lot like me. But I was bored. It was like, and I did good in shop back when we had shop, metal shop, wood shop, architectural drafting, agriculture. Ag was nothing. I mean, that's kind of like, we had an ag teacher, was a good teacher, but it's kind of like, there's an old saying, teachers are the people they can't do, so they teach.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah.
And he was a great ag teacher, but he couldn't farm. He couldn't. He had started out with Alice Chalmers, and he couldn't set his plow up to make sure that it plowed even. He couldn't.
Yeah.
He couldn't determine on how you calibrated your planter. And so us freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors in high school, we go do it for him. We had to do it for him, and he was our ag teacher.
He's teaching you how to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jay, you talked about all the surgeries you had, the multiple times that you were on death's door, your time in Vietnam just a little bit. But thinking back, is your resilience and your grit, is that genetic? Did that come from your parents, your grandparents? Or was that just a combination of that with growing up on the prairies there in northern Illinois?
I just what you said. I believe if there's anything that's from a DNA that can be done, because my heritage goes back on my mother's side to Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and they were working people, work, and on my father's side, Pennsylvania Dutch, England, and they came over back in the 1700s, and they worked and they farmed and they never knew the word quit. It's perseverance. It's, to use your term from before in your blog, you said, and I just believe that it becomes part of you, and you can't explain it. You just do it. It's like, how do you do that? I don't know. And I mentioned a thing in my book. It's like this kid that's 7 foot tall comes into a basketball, and he's on the basketball court, and the coach says, "Hey, I want you to play basketball for me." And the kid says, "Well, I don't know how to play basketball." And he said, "I can teach you how to play basketball. I can't teach you how to be 7 feet tall." If you think about it, that's a fact. It's like my wife was great at graphics on a computer. Now, she didn't know graphics. She hadn't done graphics. But when we met, she was doing some typesetting for me part-time. And this is my third wife. And but she liked graphics. She was an artist. And that's what she went, that she'd been an art. She was doing scrimshaw on ivory when she was like 10 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old. And her dad made custom knives, and part, kind of a hobby.
Yeah.
But they sold them at shows. But she was an artist, so the artwork was natural. She just had to learn the computer. And the computer she picked up pretty quick because it was easier then than, you got, freehand, I guess it's Illustrator now, and Photoshop, and some people pick it up pretty quick, but you didn't have to teach or anything. But like myself, it was like going back, I think it was that plus what I learned on the farm and seeing cattle founder and understanding you need to pay attention. Keep your eye open for pink eye. Speaking of eye, pink eye or foundering or hoof rot or if you're out in the cornfields. I remember walking in the fields and picking up the dirt and knowing the difference in the smell of dirt. There's a sweet dirt and there's a sour dirt.
Yeah.
You can smell it, you can tell it, you can feel it. And looking for corn borer, looking for rootworm, looking for all that. And see, this is things I haven't thought about in 50 some years, 55 years, because I haven't been farming. But it's just there. So I think that's what helped me, and I'm not going to let something stop me as long as I'm alive. I'm not going to let it happen. That's all it is. I can't explain it.
As you were writing your book and you talk to audiences and share your story, how do you help somebody that has some perseverance, that has some grit, continue when they're faced with adversity, obstacles?
I had an assistant principal from a school in Conroe, Texas. It was a alternative high school for kids that had problems, had been in trouble or whatever. And he'd asked me, there was another business I had, and we were in the millions a year. And he said, and I'd started it from nothing. And it was about 6 years into it, I guess. And he said, Jay, I'd like you to come talk about, your job, what you do, And I thought, these kids don't understand that. I'm not going to take my time. I'm not going to. So there was the third year, and he says, well, hey, I'd like you to come talk, and we're going to have, the day when people come and talk about their jobs. And we're going to have a doctor, and we're going to have an attorney, and we're going to have, I go, you're going to have an attorney talk to kids? They don't care about an attorney. An attorney put half the kids back in school. So anyhow, I declined. And that night I thought more about it. I thought, you know what, I am going to do it. I'm going to do this. So I called them and I told them, yeah, you know what, I'm going to do it. And it was 5 classes, 55 minutes, like in a couple of weeks or something. But I said, I'm not going to, in my mind, I'm not going to talk about my job. I'm not going to talk about the business. I'm going to talk about something else. So when I started the class, this won't take long, but when I started the class, I said, number one, I want to tell you, I was on a walker because I had walked with leg braces and a cane for about 17 years. Then I had brainstem surgeries, and I was on a walker. I had to use a walker badly for about 17 years, and I've been in a wheelchair for 8 years because it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And but I told them all, you all are winners because the losers are out there. The loser, and I pointed at a window. At least you're trying. At least you're trying. And you're winners. Now, I was asked to come in here and talk about a business that I've got. It's called Imagination Plus. We do graphics displays, blah, blah, blah. We send them around the world for everybody from Anadarko Petroleum to Exxon Mobil to Black & Decker household products to I was just very fortunate. I don't quit. I ask questions, and I'd like your business. Here's what we can do. What is it you need done? We're going to do it, and it's going to be the best you've ever had. And so, and that was it. I was done. 1 minute. I said, okay, now what we're going to talk about, and I flipped the script, and I said, we're going to talk about what it takes to get through life. And so in response to your question about what I would tell somebody that has some of that grit and has some of that perseverance, what else can they do? I'm going to sum this up pretty quickly, but I started out by saying, anybody here ever hear the name Ted Geisel? I've got a couple of teachers back here, an assistant principal. Have you ever heard of Ted Geisel? No. Well, Ted Geisel wrote children's books, a lot of children's books, and he went out to get them published. But he couldn't get them published. And he went and he went and he tried and he tried and he tried. And so I'm telling these kids this. And so one night he's sitting at home and he's thinking, I've tried 22 times, I believe is the number, accurately, to try to get my books published. And he thought about. Well, he finally changed his name from Ted Geisel to Dr. Seuss. What if he would have quit?
And I think your example is appropriate, being that it's December 19th, that without grit, perseverance, and that stick-to-itiveness that my mother would call it, we would not have the Grinch. What a sad world it would be at Christmas to not have the Grinch because we wouldn't have had Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, it's just the cat in the hat. It goes back to a lot of them, that are, and Jim Carrey wouldn't have had a part, I mean, it's like,
That's true.
But stick-to-itiveness, that's a good word too. I mean, I heard that a million times when I was a little kid. You got to have it. You got to have it. And I think it was the people back then too, Jim, that also they lived through. It's like I remember asking my grandmother, what thoughts did you have of the Depression? How did that affect you? And she said, it really didn't, because we butchered our own cattle and hogs and chickens. We raised most of our own food. We canned it. We froze it. We did something. Canning was real big, of course. And applesauce to green beans to chicken. You boil your chicken. You put it in the jar. You put it in the. So it didn't really affect them much. But yet they understood it. They saw it. They heard of it. They read about it. But yet, I think that we don't have a lot of those people, and I think I'm largely one of those people, just due to age and having been raised by them, that we don't have a lot of people with a lot of grit and determination and perseverance and willingness to suck it up and bleed and just take it. And I tell sometimes people, I say, quit your I'd use the B word, but quit your complaining. The fact is that, sweat dries, blood clots, and broken bones heal. Suck it up.
Suck it up. Well, Jay, I think that's a great place for us to end our conversation with suck it up. And that's probably a good way for us to talk to my audience about, life is tough sometimes. You got to take the good with the bad, and when you're going through the bad, just suck it up so you can get to the good.
Oh, it's a good spot. There's one other thing I would like to add is, besides, it's always too soon to quit, there's 10 two-letter words that if everybody really paid attention to, it makes a big difference. And that is, if it is to be, it is up to me.
A little self-determination.
If it is to be, it is up to me. And then I like another thing. It was a quote I heard, years and years and years ago, but it really lays a lot of that out too. Is what matters that lay behind us, and what matters lay before us are small compared to the matters that lay within us. Because what you've experienced is going to determine how you act and what you're going to do in the future. Because we are a product of everything we've experienced, learned, been told, taught. You can be told 1,000 times that a Christmas tree light bulb, back when the bigger ones we had, is hot. Don't pull them on the tree. But you take your kid's hand and wrap it around that light bulb for a split second. They scream and they cry. It doesn't hurt them. I mean, it hurts them, but it doesn't bother them. But they learn. I'll bet you they never pull that light bulb again.
Yeah.
So it's, what lies behind us and what lies ahead of us are small matters compared to what lies within us. I think that if we really look at what's within us and the strength that we have in our heart, our gut, our mind, we can accomplish things that people have never could have dreamed.
Those are great words for us to think about, Jay. And as we're at Christmastide, and it's a time of reflection as we start the new year, thinking about what is in us and how we can use those skills and strength to get over what challenges we have is a great lesson for my audience.
Well, if I'm able to share a little bit, then I'm glad, and I hope it helps.
I appreciate the time that you spent with us, Jay. And to my audience, here's just another unexpected lesson of what life on a farm, in this case the prairies of northern Illinois, taught Jay about life, made him resilient, gave him the grit to survive. We're going to have more conversations like this, and as we go forward, I appreciate all the likes and follows. And if you're an Apple follower, hit that subscribe button. It would really help. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jim.